Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters from all around the world, in a new episode of Signs of Prophethood. In the previous episode, we talked about some of the miracles given to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in this episode, we're going to talk specifically about the top miracle, which is the Quran. And before this, we would like to welcome Sheikh Ibrahim Zidane. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Ibrahim.
Wa alaikum salam.
Very happy to have you, and very important topic to talk about, which is the top challenge. And when we say it's a top challenge, so we want to show our viewer why is it the top challenge.
No. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. The top challenge, or the biggest of all of the miracles, which is the Quran. Why is it? Because as the Prophet ﷺ himself, he said it clearly, that مَا مِن نَبِيٍّ مِّنْ أَنْبِيَاءِ قَبْلِي, there's no prophet from the prophets before me, إِلَّا وَأُوتِيَ عَلَى مَا مِثْلِهِ آمَنَاءَ الْبَشَرِ, which means he was given miraculous things that people saw with their own eyes and they believed accordingly. And then he said ﷺ that I was given wahy, I was given revelation from Allah as the miracle. And the Prophet ﷺ did not deny the fact that there were other miracles, but this is the biggest of all of them. Why? Because he said ﷺ right after that, because I hope that I will be the most among all of the prophets of Allah that have followers.
Is it a sign, Sheikh Ibrahim, sorry to interrupt, that it is like the upcoming age after the Prophet is going to be more intellectual than physical?
Definitely, and many of them, they mention this. And what we see in the life that we live in, the biggest trial for people really that shapes their minds and their beliefs and so on is the speech of others. We are so much affected by the speech of people, whether it's written or heard and so on. And that's why the people, the human beings that are in need of a living miracle to be with them till the day of judgment, which is the Quran, which is the speech of Allah. And when people would compare the speech of Allah to the speech of the human beings, there's no comparison whatsoever, because this is one of the attributes of Allah, and nothing is the like of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a human speech, it's the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the Quran, so the miraculous wordings of it linguistically in the Arabic language, and also the meanings that are present in the Quran that exposes everything the way it is, and to speak the truth the way it is, and to basically the miraculous meanings and legislations and rulings and so on and so forth that are mentioned in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran that this is a living, as if it's a living messenger all over the world. As he said subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَبَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ نَذِيرًا فَلَا تُطِعِ الْكَافِرِينَ وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا. This verse was revealed in Mecca. There was no fighting yet for the believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if we will, we would send for every town a messenger, a warner to them. But then he said, do not obey the disbelievers, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ. Struggle towards them, meaning the disbelievers with it, meaning with the Quran, a magnificent or a great struggle. So that means the Quran is basically, as it's clearly mentioned in the verse, is like a messenger has been sent to every single town on the face of earth. So this is the subject of the messengers. This is basically what comes into the space or the place of a messenger after the messenger.
SubhanAllah. And there is a point I want to touch upon here, Sheikh Ibrahim. The point of that the Quran is the verbatim word of Allah. It's not the meaning. It's word for word. And this is as a comparison to even other revelations before us. Now they're changed, or lots of the message now is changed. They say, even themselves, they say according to Luke, according to Matthew. They don't say this is the word of God like directly. So this is a big difference, and maybe this is a continuation of what we said, that the message of Islam is a continuation and also a completion and correction. So when we know that this letter came to us from somebody that we like or love, and every and each word is written by him, we're going to really like this letter so much and we want to read it, want to understand it. And by this definition, we of course, as an example, we have to deal with the Quran. Is this correct?
Yes, and that's when we see the Quran, for example, versus the rest of the words of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ spoke, and that's actually the other half of the revelation from Allah is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, his way, his speech and actions and so on. He would give speeches and talks and so on and so forth. And comparing the speech of the Prophet ﷺ to the Quran is comparing between the heavens and the earth. And that's by itself is such a miraculous thing. So the Quran is the exact words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the Quran with letter and sound. Nothing is the like of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you compare this, as you said, to the previous books where we believe in all of these books are words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but people distorted it. And that's why it's people, they would use these books as translations, and nobody has the original words, kept for the most part. And when it comes to the Quran, if you go to any masjid, any place of worship, any mosque all over the earth, in the east and the west, whether people speak Arabic or not, you enter the masjid in Salatul Maghrib, Salatul Isha, or Salatul Fajr, when the Imam says Allahu Akbar, everybody speaks the same language, which is the Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. We get to understand the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by translating the meanings of what is being said. So the miraculous thing is not in the translation of the book of Allah. I remember one time I was in some of the airports and I saw someone, he approached me and he said, "Did you see the new Quran?" And I said, "What new Quran?" Because he sees me like this. So he came and he opened this, translated copy. It looks like, the copies of the Quran. And the Arabic has been changed. Every time the name of Allah is mentioned, they would say, "and his son," or something funny like this. In the Arabic, if a person reads it, he would laugh. Because it doesn't make sense whatsoever, and it takes away the miraculous linguistics of the Quran. But in the translation, people can write whatever they want in the translation. It does not have, there's no miraculous thing into the linguistics of it. And that's why no matter what they do, the Quran would never be changed. Why? Because this is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He promised for it to be saved. And it's saved in the hearts of the people more than anything else. It's not saved in books necessarily. It's mainly in the hearts of the people. That's why young and old, which is another sign for human being to think. Where is that book on the face of earth that millions and millions of people would have it memorized by heart? Something that is 603 pages in some of the versions of the Quran, 603 pages, memorized not just by those who speak the language of it, but most of them are actually, they're not speaking the language of the Quran. People that their mother tongue is English or Indonesian or Chinese or whatever there is, and they memorize the entire Quran from the beginning to the end.
And we can track maybe from this person to the Prophet.
To the Prophet ﷺ. Chain of narrations that they got this memorization from one generation to the other.
There's no book like this in the world.
This is the highest level of authentication. There's no such a thing that exists on the face of earth. People, when they have books that are written 200 years ago, they don't doubt of its authenticity. When we have something like this memorized by millions of people, this is a miraculous thing. This is something that only those who are stubbornly would turn away from the truth, they would say something else. But this is a clear evidence from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So can we say, Shaykh Ibrahim, that the number one miracle of the Quran, and before this question I want to know, are there different types of miracles inside the Quran itself, or just one type?
Now, we can say that this is the biggest miracle, yes. And that's what stays for all of the time to come after the Prophet ﷺ. And the challenge of it, as we said, that miracles is based on challenge. And if nobody can come up with the challenge, that means the challenge stays to be true. So if someone says, "I'm the fastest person on the face of earth," and nobody come and oppose that challenge, that means he stays to be the fastest person on the face of earth. So the Quran, the challenge came to bring the like of the entire Quran. Nobody came forward. Bring the like of 10 surahs, 10 chapters of the Quran. No one. Bring the like of one surah, one chapter, and not necessarily Surah Al-Baqarah, the biggest chapter. Bring the like of even Surah Al-Kawthar, which is إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. You can fit it in one line. Can humanity, if they all get together to bring the like of it, they won't be able to. So the challenge is still till today. It will continue till the Day of Judgment, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised in the Quran. So therefore, the challenge is still there. That means the Quran is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the miraculous words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why this is the biggest challenge, and this is the biggest miracle for people to see this miraculous thing till the Day of Judgment, so that nobody would have an excuse whatsoever but to follow the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And are there many different miracles within the Quran? Of course. The biggest of all of them is the linguistics of the Quran, in which people, they spoke the Arabic language, they wrote amazing poetry, and it's the most richest language when it comes to meanings and vocabulary and so on. People were able to articulate themselves in an amazing way that people think that this is not human beings that are writing these poetry. And for people to be challenged with matters of knowledge and science and so on to get into this. So the linguistic part is the most important of all of them, plus the subject of the Quran. The Quran is not just some nice words of poetry that has no benefit to it. No, it has matters of belief, matters of rulings, basically how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the perfect way with every single part of our body, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with things to be done by our hearts, things to be said with our speech, things to be done physically, manners, legislations, how to even govern the lives of nations. If you're a leader, you would get from the Quran what you need to be as a leader. If you're a follower, if you're a father, if you're a mother, rulings that regulates the marriage and even divorces and so on. Many calls in the Quran that talks to human beings, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. Many calls, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe. You know, something that is, even when you go deep into the Quran, this Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ at the time when he was living ﷺ throughout 23 years, and you'd read it today and as if the Quran was revealed today. It does not talk necessarily about the people that was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, only related to the incident that happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Asbab al-Nuzul, or to know why the verses were revealed, is to help us to understand so that we apply the meanings of it in the most perfect way. But you would never find in the Quran the personal enmities to the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned. The people of Quraysh is mentioned maybe one time in the Quran. And they were the fierce enemies to the Prophet ﷺ. It was not even mentioned in the context of being enemies, because their enmity did not stay forever. And the same thing with those individuals mentioned, or the life of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, something that the Prophet ﷺ is going through this with Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and the like of this, and you would find one time maybe mentioned the Abu Lahab as a miraculous thing for the Quran, because Abu Lahab could have embraced Islam, and that destroys the entire Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned him that he will continue to be a disbeliever till the moment of his death. So the subjects of the Quran are amazing, and every verse in itself is a miraculous thing, but needs for people to reflect upon it. And that's why when we're given da'wah to others, that's the easiest thing ever. Read the book of Allah, read the Quran. And it's a call for us as Muslims. Why you're going left and right and trying to invent things with your own intellect and so on. The Quran is sufficient for us to convey the message of the Quran. If people do not understand the Arabic language, you convey the message of it, convey what's mentioned in the Quran, understand it, and convey these meanings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what fits best to the human beings.
And this actually was my next question, but after inshallah a short break, Sheikh Ibrahim, the point of that why the Quran was revealed in Arabic. So after a short break, dear brothers and sisters, we're going to come with Sheikh Ibrahim Zidane in Signs of Prophethood. Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters, to Signs of Prophethood. And we were, before the break, talking about the Quran was revealed in Arabic language. And I had a question to Sheikh Ibrahim about why is the Quran in Arabic, especially that some people, they can say that it's in Arabic, so it's not a challenge to everyone. This is the first question. And the second thing is, for people, they are not going to understand the Quran because it is revealed in Arabic. So how can we respond?
No. First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that revealed the Quran, and nobody is to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has to be with a language that people understand. And when we look at the wisdom behind it, and we look at the languages of the human beings, the languages that they speak, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised the Quran by mentioning the linguistics of it and the language of the Quran being the Arabic language, that it's Kitabun Arabiyyun Mubin. It's an Arabic book, Mubin. Mubin, that means it's clear, made very clear, very specific, very detailed. There's no whatsoever ambiguity in it whatsoever for people to understand the purpose of their life. And the goal is the message to go across and for people to comprehend it perfectly. You would never find any better way than how the Quran was revealed. And this is something that is mentioned in the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ and his people with they speak in Arabic. And the powerful language in the Arabic language is such an amazing one that the way that people would articulate themselves with the least number of words, this is something very clear in the translation. You look at something that you translate from Arabic to something else, to any other language, usually it takes more words and more time to articulate it. As mentioned, some people that use this as the questions and answers and things like this.
Like right. Shall we compel you with this?
Right.
Like,
one word that in simple letters you have to translate it with a sentence. And this is not just in one language or the other at the time. As we said, it's universal. So the entire earth you know, and with all of the different languages. I remember one time I was somewhere, and this was in somewhere in Africa, and I was speaking in Arabic, and the translator is translating. I speak for 1 minute, and the translator is translating for 5 minutes.
Wow.
So I was like, I thought maybe he's just adding things from himself. And so I asked him, are you sure they're translating only what I'm saying? Because this is amana, this is a trust. You should not add more than what is being said. He said we have limited words or limited ways to express these meanings. So he has to keep on going back and forth to get the meanings across. And this is just simple words that a person is mentioning. Imagine then when it's the Quran. And people can see that even with the translations of the Quran. Many other benefits and wisdom behind it, but the powerfulness of the language and the meanings, which is the most important thing for people to have the understanding of it.
And that's why the translation may translate just one aspect of the word and just leave the other. And that's why the person who doesn't know Arabic, he should know the tafsir, not only the translation, the interpretation, to see as much as he can the angles of the verse itself, because the word itself can have comprehensive, of course, meaning. And by this, I want to ask you, Sheikh Ibrahim, what about that? Is it possible to, as a thought experience, can we remove one word and put another, even if it is almost like it in Arabic, in the same verse and has the same meaning?
Right. This is something that can be done in any other book, and the meaning would not change. And there are so many synonyms to the same word. But when it comes to the Quran and the richness of the Arabic language, one word can have up to 70 synonyms to it. But if you replace one word with another in the Quran, it would lose the perfection of it, the miraculous sound of it, and the meanings of it, and every single letter has its significance. And this is when we look in the tafsir, the explanations of the Quran, and volumes of books, and discussing the letters and the linguistics of the Quran. It's amazing. And people, this is one of the things that never ends when it comes to the sciences of the Quran. If people even try with the understanding of the meaning to replace it with another word and see how the effect of it, something would make completely different essence of what the meanings is. These things might not be seen clearly in the translation, because the translation, or even the tafsir, is translating the meanings of what is being mentioned in the Quran. That's why the meanings is not just linguistics, because it's another very, very dangerous thing for people to explain the Quran based on linguistics only, because the Quran explains itself, and the Prophet ﷺ explains the Quran, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, and linguistics too. But this comes before it, the Quran itself, and the way the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran was practiced. And the Quran, the verse can give more than one meaning, but the actions of the Prophet ﷺ makes the clear understanding of the Quran, and also the actions of the companions radiallahu anhum, those who understood the Quran and made it very clear to the people with their actions. So which is another thing, a book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that was applied perfectly by a generation. And the work of this generation is saved for humanity to see how they applied the Quran. This does not exist on the face of earth except for us as Muslims, and for people to see that this is the truth that they need to follow. There's no such a thing on the face of earth. The Quran with so many verses, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ applied all of that in his life perfectly, and the companions radiallahu anhum, especially when the time of the 4 khulafa. It's amazing.
So we can say it's a type of preservation of the Quran. Not only that Allah protects the Quran, nobody can change it, but it's also the preservation of how to understand the Quran and apply it.
And how to apply it. And that's why when people discovered some versions of the Quran buried, and it was a big news at one time, a few years ago, this doesn't work with the Quran. The Quran doesn't need to be discovered for people to find, oh, this is authentic and so on. First of all, it's been saved in the hearts of the people, so it doesn't need for another hard copy for the Quran to be discovered. We already have higher authenticity than this. Plus, it's not something discovered that let's interpret the Quran nowadays differently than how it was interpreted before. And that's a movement, actually, that has so much evil aspects to it. The Quran was perfectly interpreted in actions and speech by the Prophet ﷺ, by the early generations of Islam, and we see that clearly, and it's preserved for us, and that's part of the preservation of the wahy.
So does that mean that we cannot add to the interpretation by seeing different angles also that can appear to people even after the 3 generations?
No, definitely yes. People can add things of things that comes up, and that's what the richness of the Quran in this. But when it comes to matters of belief, for example, people not to contradict what is the matters of belief, matters of worship. People would not say, well, it doesn't mention Salatul Dhuhr 4 rak'ah in the Quran. Things of that nature. Things has to stay the way it was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in the early generations of Islam. But the Quran never ceases to bring all kinds of benefits and miraculous meanings, scientific things that people discover and they see it clearly with their own eyes. Not that the Quran is a book of science, but these signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran for people to understand it better nowadays than before, for example, or even to have the richness of the meaning without contradiction. So one verse can mean many things and they're all correct and then they're not contradicting one another. This is a valid thing and it's a very valid thing in tafsir of the Quran.
About the point of the scientific miracles, what is like the standard, the measurement that we can use to know that this is an appropriate way of understanding the verses that some people, they say it's miraculous? They have to be like both, like have this scholarship in religion and also in science to understand this?
Right. First of all, the Quran, since it's the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, overpower and overrule everything. Science and non-science, whatever there is. When people discover things or they make a theory about something, it's not necessarily the ultimate truth. But when we're talking about facts of life that nobody can doubt whatsoever, yes, this is something else. So when things get discovered that people saw with their own eyes, it's a fact of life, and something is mentioned in the Quran about that particular sign, mashallah, it describes it perfectly. Like the stages of the embryo in the wombs of the mother and so on. This is something that is clearly stages mentioned in the Quran, that facts of life, that people can see that. But theories, this is something that we should stay away. And the Quran is not a book of science, but it has signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from the human beings to look into the universal signs, the physical signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, which is to be taken as a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one worthy of worship. So these signs are mentioned in the Quran in the most perfect and the truthful way. 1400 years ago, when people have their own theories and understanding and so on. So there's nothing in the Quran that would contradict the facts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. So if people look at it from that perspective, there's no harm. But to go, in extreme in this, even if it's only about the truth, the Quran is a book of guidance.
Yes.
So when people start talking about how the salah is scientifically this and that and the zakah and so on, people need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and these signs, no harm if it's used as a way to strengthen one's iman.
And we can understand from this, Shaykh Ibrahim, that from the Quran, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ, like you can walk into earth and you see how the beginning of creation happened. So this is also a type of worship, that the type of worships are different types, and this is one of them that the Quran is telling people to do.
Right, and that's one of the miraculous things is that usually the religion in the minds of the people is something that is against science and against facts of life, and that's why many people, they deserted religion because of this. Because religion to them, it brings things that is against their own senses and so on. We don't have this problem in the religion of Islam. Islam encourages people to study, because everything is a creation of Allah, and this is the book of Allah, so it would not contradict what people find and see from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this by itself is a challenging thing for humanity, but for people to take the message lightly and not to search it for their own sake, because the matter is a very serious one. Quran says that if a person dies in the state of disbelief, they will be in the hellfire. It's a serious matter for people to take serious and to find for themselves how the Quran is basically the perfect word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
SubhanAllah. Thank you so much again, Shaykh Ibrahim, and we hope to see you again inshallah next episodes. And thank you, dear brothers and sisters, and until next time, stay tuned for the signs of prophethood. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.